right.
So good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I'm Dan Murphy, president of the Olmsted Society.
Yay!
Thank you, thank you. And also I coordinate presentations for our group. And so tonight we're going to hear from two experts on the field on the topic of outdoor activities, nature-based activities for children and the benefits, the physical, psychological, emotional benefits of nature-based play. So I have with me Ann Vertovec, MD. She is an integrative emergency physician at Northwestern University. She completed her medical degree in emergency medicine at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Being a veteran emergency physician, she turned to integrative medicine after observing the growing epidemic of chronic lifestyle diseases, including diabetes, obesity, and anxiety. After completing the Osher Fellowship on Integrative Medicine and becoming board certified in integrative medicine, Dr. Vertovec now dedicated her time primarily to reciprocal health benefits of nature and to planetary health through her leadership role at the Osher Center for Integrative Health, which is at Northwestern University. Her work centers on research, including implementation of a nature RX or prescription.
Nature prescription.
Prescription program and education, including a medical student elective on planetary health. Kate Varey, PhD, is an assistant professor at the Harry Truman College in the City Colleges of Chicago in the Education, Human Development, and Family Studies Department. She's a seasoned plurilingual, I'm struggling with one language. She's a plurilingual educator, having worked with diverse students, families, and communities for almost 2 decades in early childhood, elementary, high school, and college contexts. In the spring of 2023, Kate defended her dissertation, A Descriptive Exploration of Quality and Opportunities in Outdoor Urban Play Spaces, the Case of Chicago Public School, and graduated with her doctoral degree from the Erickson Institute at Loyola University, Chicago. Her ongoing research interests include nature-based play and education, wellness, environmental affordances, and cross-cultural studies impact on learning, development, and education. So this is the topic that has interested me for a while. A number of years ago, I read a book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv.
I'm going to talk about it.
And it made quite an impression on me. My children were young at the time, and it really kind of drove home to me the point that I had to get my kids outside to play for their benefit. And so with that.
Thank you. So again, you're here to hear the health benefits of outdoor nature-based activities for children, and families, so they can get out there and play in nature. We're going to start with a short, fun little video. We're going to see if it works.
For the first time ever in documentary history, an international team emerges from the wilderness to explore and understand one of nature's most curious and threatened creatures, the indoor human being. Join our team on the adventure of a lifetime to uncover and try to rescue the wondrous and intriguing indoor human. Nature RX presents Wild on Humans with special guest Jane Goodall. The indoor human is a recent phenomenon contrasting thousands of years of outdoor human activity. Today, humans often appear stuck in their square nests and angular dens all the time. Our team wonders what is going on.
Unfortunately, humans today are really silly, and because people are being deprived of nature, they don't understand how important it is. And it really is very, very stupid.
Join Buddy Bison, Harker the Beaver, Puddles, Blue Goose, and Ranger Roo for an unforgettable adventure of a lifetime. Stay tuned as our team uncovers the mysteries and battles the odds. Can the indoor human be saved before it's too late?
There you go.
Okay.
Awesome. Welcome again. We have no disclosures except that hopefully tonight we will transform your view of nature and the outdoors. It's all right. Thought we'd start with a little history. About 300,000 years ago, humans began living in close relationship with nature as they were evolving, adapting to and thriving within natural environments. And many ancient societies and indigenous cultures have long recognized that human health is inseparable from the health of their ecosystem, and that nature is more than just a source of food and resources. It's really an extension of your body, mind, spirit, and community. We are part of nature. The ancient societies obviously completely depended on nature for their survival, and the indigenous groups really believe to only use what you need, only take what you need, thank the earth for offering it to you. And that's the whole theory of the 7 generations, that you only want to take what you need so that it will be around for the next 7 generations.
Okay, also too, thinking about just education and atmospheres created for study or even contemplation often include natural aesthetics, right? So monasteries, college campuses. And then if you look at educational theory, people who have been in discussion for many, many years. John Dewey is a constructivist actually out of University of Chicago. He very much valued nature and education. Also, Froebel, who was like the founder of kindergarten, and Maria Montessori, Reggio Emilia, these approaches that very much embed natural experiences into learning and development when working with children.
Unfortunately, over the past several centuries, there's been a growing disconnect related to colonialism, industrialization, and urbanization. So we are increasingly disconnected from nature. Society's really shifted towards a transactional relationship with the environment, and nature's often exploited for economic gain rather than valued as a fundamental necessity for well-being. Now today, many see nature really as a luxury rather than an essential part of life, and we forget our interdependence. Aldo Leopold in 1949 said, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." And today, in the United States, we spend 93% of our time indoors.
It's nice and warm and air conditioned.
This is true.
And you do have beautiful view of nature outside here, as your community is so beautiful and full of nature. But back in 2005, Richard Louv coined the term nature deficit disorder, and he was especially talking about children, because children are in particular affected by this nature deficit. In 1971, 80% of 7 and 8-year-olds walked to school. In 1990, it was 10%. And currently, only 10% of children spend time outdoors every day. And in fact, children now spend half as much time outdoors as their parents did. So it really does ring home what Richard Louv was talking about.
So, unpacking the why a little bit more about this is thinking about the age of industrialization moving into modern times, and now we're in this postmodern era of intellectual information input, right, at your disposal for lots of people, especially those who are in urban environments. So if you look at the global population, half of the global population is living in an urban environment. Additionally, structured schooling. So children the majority of children, especially in urban environments in the United States, are going to be in traditional public schools. These are still, many of them, working on a bell system, broken subjects, 45 minutes, and then you switch to something else. It is also based on kind of like a factory model, walking in lines, things that we know that are helpful as far as getting children to be more creative and inquiry focus based is not necessarily what is being offered during the school day. Additionally, most of them are sitting in, rectangular classrooms in desks or tables underneath fluorescent lights, listening to a teacher-directed activity. So that's still very much the case for lots of schools. Also, we're talking about digitalization, right? Even within the last, I'm like approaching 50, I didn't get a cell phone until I was like in my 20s, right? Now we see many, many children walking around with devices, sitting in the car, right, with the iPad, what have you, at the restaurant. This is just very, very customary to see more and younger people using technology, especially the small handheld devices, right? So all your iPads, phones, things like that. Those have taken a tremendous amount of increase within the last 10 years per se. And then of course, environmental injustice. If you look at the history as well as just the current state of affairs, marginalized communities, BIPOC communities, there are going to be dealing with situations in the conditions of the environment that are not necessarily the greatest, and that also have significantly negative health outcomes as far as their health, education, and this type of thing. And so all of that is really contributing to this problem.
But I'm going to now talk about the health benefits of nature. But first, Kate's going to talk about the theory.
So we got some theories because we are academics and we have to talk some theory. So biophilia is really like this overarching theory on these ideas. And this comes from Wilson. And really is this concept that essentially we affiliate to nature. This is something that's embedded in our history, in our evolution as human beings. And we also have biophobic tendencies as well, right? We still are afraid of snakes, even though we're not necessarily going to be seeing snakes living in a city, right? And so from there, also I think an interesting point that some other scholars mention is that this is something that, yes, is very natural, organic, and embedded in our human beingness, but at the same time, it has to be nurtured and valued, right, in order for it to really have come to its full potency, if you will. There's other two sister theories. One is stress reduction theory. This comes from Ulrich, and this is the idea that essentially being in nature helps reduce stress, whether that be physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress, and additionally, not being in nature could potentially cause stress. Also, attention restoration theory. This comes from Kaplan. And this is the idea that nature is essentially restorative because it has certain components. When you're outside and experiencing something like walking through this beautiful park right next to us, you will have a sense of feeling like you're away, right? You have a sense of soft fascination, which gives you this feeling of relaxing, but at the same time engaging. It's very similar to flow in positive psychology. Csikszentmihalyi, I don't know if you guys have ever checked him out. He's also very parallel, I think, to this idea. But really, basically, being outside in nature helps you as a sensory reset.
Really, all of that has to do with the parasympathetic nervous system. That's okay. I think you're all familiar with that fight or flight, and unfortunately, modern society puts us sympathetic drive. Our sympathetic nervous system is going so much more than our parasympathetic, because our body's response to stress is the same as if there was a tiger behind you. It doesn't know the difference, and so that stress builds, and the parasympathetic system, which is the rest and relax, can come on when you are in nature, among other things. So in a way, all those theories, in addition to things like more exercise, better air quality, vitamin D exposure, they explain some of these many health benefits of being in nature. In fact, there's nearly 40 years of research and over 6,000 scientific articles based on nature and health in some way. So I can't talk about them all, don't worry, but I am going to review and highlight a few of my favorite research. So I'm going to start with the physical benefits of nature. So when you talk about children, green spaces positively influence different aspects of brain development along with physical development as they're exercising, exploring, becoming creative. All of those help in their development. In addition, just general health and reduced mortality occur with exposure to nature, and improved immune function. That's tested one of the ways with the natural killer cells and also with cortisol levels. So a lot of these studies are not just observational studies in nature. They actually, take blood samples and do functional MRIs to come up with the research that they're doing. I will highlight a few more here. When it regards to memory and attention, even a 40-second exposure to nature can provide a boost in attention. So for those who have to sit at computers all day, just to spend 40 seconds and look outside has benefits, even though it's such a short period of time. Overall, 2 hours a week is what's considered beneficial to help improve your health with nature exposure. So 2 hours a week, divided however you want to. In addition, improved pain control, increased physical activity. Now, that's not just because you're outside, maybe you walk more. It's been shown that physical activity in nature has added benefits than the same activity in a different environment. And obviously exposure to sunlight helps you sleep better. It gets you on your circadian rhythm, but it does need to have sunlight enter your eyes to really affect your circadian rhythm. Next, thank you. And going on to reducing illness, I'm going to focus on myopia here because this is a childhood talk. Studies have shown that if children are exposed to sunlight in outdoor spaces before the age of 24 months, they're much less likely to develop myopia, which is that nearsightedness which so many of us have because we're always looking at screens or books or things that are just at a certain distance from our eyes. What happens when you're outside, not only are you exposed to a broader range of wavelengths of light, you are looking at different distances all the time, and that's like exercising your eye muscles. So it's really, really healthy to be able to look at different distances when you're outside. And next is the mental health benefits of being outside in nature. So you have increased focus, sense of well-being, pro-social behavior, social connectedness, which is the biophilia that E.O. Wilson talked about. And he actually felt that it's important to have exposure to nature before adolescence to really instill that biophilia. In addition, there's regard for the environment and awe. And awe is very interesting. That's that sense that you belong to a greater world, and you may not understand it, but you feel part of it, and you tend to be have less rumination and feel less self-import, and it's really healthy to feel awe for any reason, but in nature, obviously, is an example of where you can look at a sunrise or look at a mountain and really feel the awe of the amazement of that. In addition, you get reduced depression, stress, anxiety, and aggression. And there's about a 3-fold improvement in ADHD symptoms. And basically greater happiness and life satisfaction. One of the studies I thought is worth mentioning, they did a functional MRI study that showed decreased activity in the region of the brain that deals with rumination and depression just after a 90-minute nature walk. All right. And there is no bad weather. There is just bad preparation for weather. So I thought I would plug the benefits of rain. So rain does clear the air. You know, it takes the pollutants and washes them away. But in addition, when those water droplets hit hard surface, they develop negative ions. And these negative ions boost our mood, relieve stress, and give us more energy, and really have a positive effect on our health. And I'm sure you've been out in healthy soil and you smell that fresh smell of soil after a rain. There's terms for that. Geosmin is really the smell that's made by the soil bacteria. And our noses are really sensitive to that smell. And actually, it has a calming effect, and it's antiviral, anti-inflammatory. So it has a number of benefits that we are just learning about. Now we're going to move on to the complex nature-human interactions. And I think you know that living in this community, that nature is everywhere. You don't have to drive to Yellowstone to experience nature. It's right outside your door. And even very complex ecosystems exist in our backyards because every member of the ecosystem is important, and they've evolved together over thousands of years, from those microorganisms in the soil all the way up to the apex predator, which is often the hawk in this community. And the ecosystem, the animals, and us as humans all rely on plants. And plants are really essential for life. So I wanted to put a little plug in for plants as we're talking about being outside. That usually involves plants. Plants we're really discovering are alert, active, processing beings. They have the equivalent of all 5 senses. And they are able to communicate both through volatile chemicals that they emit and under the ground through the mycorrhizal networks that connect trees in vast forests. They preferentially talk to their children, then their relatives, and then other species of trees. It's called the wide wood web. And I wanted to give one example of how complex plants are that we're just learning about. It's a simple experiment. They, in Germany, there's beech trees and other trees that typically get eaten by roe deer. And roe deer are small, but they travel in big herds. So they took these trees and they snipped them like a roe deer would bite them. Half of them they painted with the roe deer saliva, and the others they didn't. And what they found right away, those that had been painted with the roe deer changed their biochemistry to make them less tasty to the roe deer. That was their defense mechanism. The other ones didn't do it. And not only that, they can communicate underground through this mycorrhizal network to let the other trees know that the roe deer are nearby. And the theory is that a tree is going to survive better in a forest than by itself. So that's just one example of how complicated the communication and the abilities of plants are. And of course, they can't move, so they've had to develop over time complex relationships with pollinators in order to procreate. I do have a quote here. I'm going to read it very quickly. The living world is a unique and spectacular marvel. Billions of individuals and millions of kinds of plants and animals working together to benefit from the energy of the sun and the minerals of the earth, leading lives that interlock in such a way that they sustain each other. We rely entirely on this finely tuned life support machine, and it relies on its biodiversity to run smoothly. Yet the way we humans live on Earth now is sending biodiversity into a decline. This is Sir David Attenborough. I am going to talk shortly about this, the pollinators, pesticides, people, and the planet. Because if you're outside in nature with children, you want it to be healthy. The pollinators are obviously essential for plants, including our food supply. In fact, we rely on bees for 1/3 of our food supply. And we're experiencing this catastrophic loss of wildlife in our own backyards and in wild spaces. 1/3 of Americans' wildlife species are at risk, and monarch butterflies, for example, have disappeared 90 to 99%. So, and birds have also gone down about 30%. So if you care about the birds, then we need to care about the bugs too, because it takes about 5,000 caterpillars to feed one nest of songbirds. And so everything is all interrelated, so it's important. Briefly, I'm going to mention neonics. These are systemic pesticides being used in all the annuals, much of the landscaping plants you buy, and agriculture. And unfortunately, it's killing bees, birds, and other planets at an exponential rate. One seed can kill a songbird. So if you are purchasing anything, look for neonic-free for that reason. And I'm going to give one example of the importance of every member of an ecosystem. This occurred when the fungus-causing white nose syndrome started depleting the bats, and there was a huge loss of bats in certain areas. And bats, of course, these are the insect-eating bats. So what happened was the farmers needed to increase their insecticide use by 31%. And what this study found is in those areas where the bats had died off, insecticide use was increased. Infant mortality increased 8%. So just by one species, these bats dying, really affected human health too. So just to mention how complex it all is. We're good. Yeah. So next, just when I'm talking about plants, it is helpful if we all plant a little native in our yards. I know that we're talking about getting kids outside, but you want them to get them outside healthy. Native plants have adapted to the local ecosystems. They're easier to take care of. They require less care. They're not going to take over. They're great food sources for our native insects and birds, and they're more resistant to frost, drought, flood, and common diseases. And they also improve our water, air, and soil quality. But you have to know your plant sources. You don't want to plant a milkweed to help the monarchs to find out that it had neonics in it, and it's actually killing the monarchs. So know your plant sources. You can go to Homegrown National Park for a lot of information. That'll be at the end, one of our resources. Yeah. A quick study showing the importance of nature. This shows that if you go from the left to the right, you can see the y-axis is mortality, that the mortality is decreased for all groups. The groups listed are, the highest income is the darkest bar on the left. The lowest income is the lightest bar on the right. And as you go to the right, they have more green space. So what happens? Everybody has less mortality, but especially those with the lowest income. I just thought it's a fascinating study. Just having green space like you do here, you're going to live longer because you live in such a beautiful community. The last quick study I'm going to talk about is, again, the emerald ash borer came through, killed 100 million ash trees, and what they found in the counties where that happened, there was higher mortality related to heart and respiratory disease. So, moving on to better things. The dirt's almost the final frontier. We're really learning how complex the dirt is below us. And you may have heard of the hygiene hypothesis, which is the concern of this epidemic of autoimmune diseases in the United States and other developed countries, and they felt that it may be because little kids are not exposed to dirt as much anymore, along with this high prevalence of antibiotics, antibacterial soap everywhere, that they're too clean, so that they're developing these autoimmune diseases. This has been supported in some mice studies, which found that early exposure to microbes had a long-lasting positive effect to the immune system in mice. So there's a lot of things that soil does for us. It really, touching the soil, smelling plants, stimulates the brain, increases synaptic plasticity, and promotes overall brain health, in addition to causing an increase in serotonin and dopamine. Those are some of your relaxation neurotransmitters. It decreases your inflammatory cytokines, improves anxiety and depressed mood, and promotes brain health. So dirt is good. And it's related to the gut microbiome, again, because as you're exposed to the dirt, it interacts with our gut microbiome, and it increases the diversity of our own gut microbiome, improving gut resiliency, adaptability, enhancing immune function, and reducing this risk of autoimmune diseases. I have an asterisk there because this is why when you go to Mexico, you don't drink the water, but they can drink the water because they've lived there. So it's small doses, like in that picture, just a little dirt on your toe that your body gets exposed to that then allows you to adapt to certain bacteria. So that's why those of us who haven't had that exposure, we get traveler's diarrhea, right? And olfaction, I mentioned about smell before, that the human nose is very complicated, and its connection to the brain. In fact, it can detect 1 trillion different smells, and we have like multiple olfactory genes, and we have olfactory receptors all over our body. We're still trying to figure out why, but we do know that smell actually bypasses the blood-brain barrier, and that's why smells bring on such a strong, vivid memory to us and an emotional response. And that's one of the reasons that essential oils work well, right? Because it goes directly to the brain. And therefore, smells have a more profound effect on stress reduction than visual and auditory stimuli. So obviously, this time of year, there's so many wonderful smells out there with all the flowering trees, and they are so beneficial. And the things about trees, when they emit those smells, they're also emitting, depending on which tree, anti-inflammatories, anti-infective, antiviral, anti-cancer, analgesics, mood boosters, and we haven't realized this, but that's why, one of the reasons why we kind of feel happy when we're in a forest and we get those smells.
All right. So we want you guys to smell. No, I'm just playing. I want you to think about a time back in your childhood. It could be any time, just a positive memory. So just take a minute or so and reflect. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you feeling in that time? And just see if you can pinpoint something in your mind. Okay. Does anybody have one that they want to share? Great.
Sure.
Grass in the summertime.
Grass in the summertime?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I see a head nod back there, so he's working.
He's working. Yes, please.
Just sitting in a tree
Uh-huh.
in the forest.
Okay. So I want you guys to check out this next image here and think about your memory and looking at the two different sides of the screen, are you associating with this little boy who has like maybe a game, Nintendo X or something like this, or like a phone? Or are you associating your memory on the other side of the image? Which, just a show of hands, are you in the nature side of things? Yeah. Okay.
Everybody.
Everybody. So like that's really powerful to think about. And so, you know, shifting gears and now really thinking about children and specifically what about nature affects them and what is so special about what the outdoors really provides for them, those affordances. What does it give to the children that is really unique and special? And so obviously everything Dr. Ann said, right, that applies to all health, right? So she'll give you many, many ideas on how we can think about, you know, physical health, mental health, psychological health, emotional health, all of that. But then also specifically for kids, there are benefits like it really does support their learning across all these domains as they're developing and also their actual development. It also promotes inquiry or play, which really are one and the same. And it helps them with fostering creativity. It gives them an appreciation for aesthetics and beauty. It also invites these sensory-driven experiences, which all of you shared just right now. Opportunities for multimodal activities, right? Diverse things that they can do. Making connections to what's real, right? This is actual real life outside. And then also these opportunities that relate to STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. But it also does improve academic outcomes across the disciplines and content areas. It is also something that's really beneficial as far as relationship building. They've done studies where children who spend more time outside have a tendency to be more pro-social, to be more collaborative, and it's also fun. So what do the kids say, right? These are actual quotes from children that I have worked with, and these are their thoughts, right? They like it, obviously. They can have adventures. There is this feeling of freedom, which comes up in different ways. I'm allowed to get loud. The adults don't bother me as much. I have more space to move around, right? I feel calm, it's fun, all of that, right? So very positive. And I think one of the, these studies at the end here is done by Peter Gray. He's an expert on play and education. And he did a large study about preferences for young children and what they think about playing outside or where they like to play. And it was determined that 89% of the children in the study prefer playing outside with their friends than watching TV, and that 86% of that say that they prefer it to the computer play, which is telling, right? In you looking at the older end of spectrum, right, this is a study that was done with adolescents in 2020 during COVID, and they did just some probing with them with some research questions to try to see like what their perceptions were related to nature. And the respondents were positive, right? And some of the things that they had to say were parallel to what the little children were saying, that this is something that helps them make them feel calm, that it can help them reduce stress. It also is motivating and helps them feel physically more fit and in shape. And then again, 88% of them want to spend more time in nature, which is very similar to what the little kid said. And only a few of those participants in the survey said that it does, you know, make you feel more isolated. Okay, so we're going to go theory again. This is related to development, and this is called the ecological systems theory. And so the way that children develop and learn is very parallel to what Dr. Ann was talking about with this biodiversity, where so many things are going on and affecting the way that they learn and grow. So if you imagine a child in the middle, that's the individual, and then they're existing in all of these different systems. So what is immediately around them, their family, their community, and then basically going out and extending. So where do they live? We're in Chicagoland area in the United States of America. This is also thinking about where we are particularly in time, right? If we looked at a development that could happen with a child in the 80s, this is very different than the learning and developmental experience that's going to be happening with children right now. So all of these factors are playing into what they're experiencing as they're growing, right? And it's like I tell my students, it's the swirling models, right? It's very messy, but all of these things are influencing how they learn and grow. This is also true for some theories approaching learning and education. So this is coming from Zaretta Hammond. She's a renowned scholar, actually known for working with early childhood education, but also inquiry-based approaches and culturally responsive teaching. And if you look at this image, right, it shows you kind of, this is related to people's culture and their identities, right? So what do we see at the top? These are kind of your surface things, the more visual, more obvious, how you dress, how you sound, you know, what you smell like, what's the most salient, what the kids notice, right? Then you have the more unspoken things, what are related to the way that maybe you communicate or how you value trust, your perception of time, your perception of space. All of these things are related to your cultural associations, your learning, essentially. And then you have your deep-rooted things that sometimes these are unconscious, that we will pass on to our families, whether it be from genetics, whether it be from experiences, right? And that's really kind of the heart of this conversation, is that that debate is null and void, right? Both of these things affect the way that people learn and grow, right? It's going to be biology, it's going to be your genetics, and it's going to be what happens to you in your experiences as you grow as a person. If we're looking at concepts of epigenetics, right, which is getting at this very idea of the impact of both nature and also biology or your genetics on the way that you live. And if you have something like bipolar disorder, this is a polygenetic disease, right? So there's multiple genes that are involved in this particular disorder, yes? If you are in a situation environmentally, depending on what happens to you, those gene phenotypes, that expression, will happen or will not, right? It depends on what your situation is, if that particular condition comes out for a person. Also, there's a lot of research looking at like childhood trauma, traumatic stress, PTSD, and there's also impacts for children or people who have been in these types of really severely trauma situations where they're looking at their actual genes and the caps on their genes, which are called telomeres. And what happens is that these things start to shrink down, which is a natural process of aging for people. That's what happens over time. It's just, you know, we're all going, there's only one way out, right? But this is showing for children who have been through something like this that they actually are showing signs of premature aging, right? So just getting at this whole concept of really that nature and nurture and how it affects you. Okay, so last theory, I swear, is this idea of affordances, right? Environmental affordances. What is the environment, whether it be an object, whether it be space, whether it be people, affording to someone? So that is going to be unique to that particular person, and that's also going to be their interpretation of what the function of these particular things or peoples or spaces is, and then what am I going to do with it, or how am I going to interpret it, right? So it's very much of a reciprocity in between the environment and also the person and what they make of it. And so my work, as far as research, one of the areas, is looking specifically at play spaces. And so if you look at this image, there's two different play areas. One that is a large open blacktop spot where you have a lot of space, which obviously affords children to be able to run around and yell, most likely, right? And there is some view that you can see in the background, which is nice as far as the aesthetics is concerned. But if you look at the other picture, there's a lot more going on there as far as what can I do with this particular space. There's different surfaces, there's different equipment, there's height levels on the equipment, there's a climbing wall. There's also things that I might come up with on my own, like hanging from the slide, even though I'm not supposed to do that, or climb up the slide, which all the kids do, or go underneath the drawbridge and have a secret hideout space because it's a nice little dark, small area that I want to go into. And so these are the types of things that I'm talking about with regard to this concept of what the affordances come from the environment. Also, the materials that you use matter. So just like having more options as far as what the space or the affordances are giving to a child or a person, also the materials are going to affect that as well. So when you're looking at things that are less defined, more variables essentially that I can do with a pile of sticks versus a Barbie doll. Now, a child is extraordinarily creative and will turn the Barbie doll into a monster and the car into a spaceship. This is what they do, right? They're imaginative creatures. However, when you have something that has more options, that's more open-ended, that really fosters that imagination, right? It pushes them to come up with more ideas. So this is a classic for all the parents in here who have ever purchased a large gift in a large box for their child. And they thought, oh my gosh, this gift is so amazing, they're gonna be so excited. And they played with it maybe for a couple days, but they played with the box for a month. Why? Because it's undefined. This box can be so many different things. And so that's what you thinking about with regard to affordances, space, materials. What can it offer me as far as really pushing my play, my imagination to come up with as many things as I possibly can. So when we're looking at structured learning versus unstructured learning, and learning and play in my head go together because I work with a lot of young children. And so when we compare and contrast these things, the majority of time what you see in school, but really playtime currently fits a lot more on the side of structured learning and play versus unstructured learning and play. So when it's structured, it's going to be organized by an adult. There's rules involved. The adult's telling you what to do. This is something that could be parallel to what happens in school. This could also be something that what happens in a lot of sports or activities after school. So there is, time where I'm going to be able to hang out with my friends, but there's still expectations that I'm going to have to dribble the soccer ball, okay? Versus unstructured, where this is really my spontaneity. I am doing what I want. There's choice. I'm directing the play. I'm directing my own learning. And the children have the choice to do what interests them. When we look at what really drives learning, if you incorporate choice and options, these affordances, the learning becomes that much more captivating for them, and it also has better staying power. So these are just some of the characteristics to recap, of the unstructured play and what are the benefits of it. So why don't you guys think about, where do you see children doing this? Like, where are the places where they actually just are playing without any rules or expectations? Do you guys have any ideas? Where have you seen them playing like this? Or with who?
Turtle Park.
Okay, at the park. Great. Anybody else have children, grandchildren in here?
In the backyard.
In the backyard, right? Maybe with brothers and sisters or with their friends. And so this is something, again, connected to these ideas of outside in nature in this group, but also thinking about school children. The majority of the time where they get to play unstructured is during recess. They spend a lot of time at school. And this is really the most common spot where you're going to observe them doing this type of play. So, first of all, this is going to be an opportunity for children when they are playing in this freestyle way, where they're going to push themselves, and they're going to actually push themselves beyond where they're at in their development and learning. So an example of something like this is a child, which I was like this kid, who does not want to sit on the carpet or the desk. And so maybe the teacher gives you a mat or some kind of special thing that you can use when you're listening to a story, and that helps you. However, this same child can play school with a friend. The friend is acting like a teacher, and they have no problem sitting at all. And the reason why is because they're playing. They're pushing themselves. And when they're in that state of mind of being in play, which is similar to flow, which is similar to awe, right? Of just enjoying, they are capable of doing more as far as their learning and development, which I think is pretty awesome. Also, this is something, when we're talking about it, they're going to be using their imagination, their cooperation. This is really the richest cognitive play. So when children are in this state of mind, they're also capable of more complex thinking, higher level thinking. They also know that play breaks in the school day are really essential and do help as far as maximizing performance, whether that be academic performance, whether that's social emotional performance. I was a teacher for 20 years in public school, and I can tell you that if we had recess time and then I tried to do math instruction after that, the children paid attention better, they understood the concepts better. If we missed recess, it was a totally different situation. They were more distracted, harder to stay on task, more behavioral issues. Why? Because they did not have that break. And the children of today are under a tremendous amount of stress when it comes to their cognition. They have high expectations of how they're going to do in school, and they need to have these breaks, right? Okay. So getting at this idea of my research work a little bit further, what I did was I looked at so many school playgrounds, but I focused on specifically 60 in Chicago public schools, and I made sure that I did a sample that was across the district in all of the different areas of the city. So I had a full spread of the actual distance of these places, and then I also did within because they have groups of schools that they put into these different like wards, if you will, yeah? And they have different terms, but it makes sense more like wards. And so within those schools, I also looked at what were the schools that were highest performing, kind of middle of the road, and lowest performing within that ward, and then also across the spread of the city. I'm not going to get too into that because that was a crazy statistical mess. Nonetheless, the majority of the playgrounds are going to look something like this, right? Modular playgrounds, smaller playgrounds, catering to the younger kids. And really my idea is, okay, this is, yes, there are things that this area does afford to the child as far as their play is concerned, and the majority of time when children are playing at recess, these are the types of spaces that they're using. But what if you changed your perception and you said, okay, well, what else is around the school? Looking at the global perspective, looking at the entire campus. Are there spaces around the school that we could use for different activities? Maybe we want to do some examination of the biodiversity that is on our campus and potentially document some things that are actually living on the school grounds. Also thinking about what is around in the neighborhood of the school. So I did an assessment of, within a 0.5 mile walking distance, which is appropriate for a very small child to walk, and looked at, okay, well, what are the things that are around this area that could enhance the play, could enhance the learning, could afford more to the children if we utilize some of these spaces more. And so I used a measure that was designed by a landscape architect, and what she did was essentially looking at specific play spaces and their design, and then also thinking about what is great for children's learning and development as far as these spaces and what we want to create that will best support that for them. And so just looking at some of these categories, right, the context, what is around the particular space, right? Here, the context is definitely the river. We have that is very much presence over there. That type of thing. Or what is challenging about this particular play area? Those are the types of things that I was looking at when I did the assessment. And so for CPS, it really was kind of middle of the road, like I would say average to below average using this particular measure. But there are two things that really stood out as far as deficit, if you will. One was this chance opportunity, which is really this idea of change, and it gets back at that discussion around the materials and like loose parts and being able to manipulate things. What's going to be different about this play space, or how can I change it in some kind of way to impact it and kind of keeping that fresh, right? So again, affording more to the child. And so even though this is outlawed to a certain degree, and I did not see any CPS school inviting loose parts play or manipulative play, the children are doing it anyways. So you can see this guy in the picture is like literally ripping out a piece of the spongy floor and using this to do different activities. There was a bunch of evidence of this, which I thought was a really interesting finding from the study. All different sorts, making seed designs, hiding rocks underneath the slide. So even though this type of activity is not supported by the public school, it's still going on. So I think that that's really revealing. Also, another area as a deficit was this challenge. So most of those playgrounds are geared towards the younger children. Once you get past like 6 or 7, a lot of those physical activities, they've mastered that type of stuff already. And also the playgrounds themselves are really heavily focused on physical challenges versus social challenges or cognitive challenges. I saw a few instances of like musical instruments, and that was really it. And so even though there are these, images or situations where they might have something more interesting, these stood out to me just because there is more going on there as far as the options. I think it's just showing that, in some ways by being this like hypersensitive, helicopterish approach to children, we have to make sure that they're careful, nobody can fall, somebody's going to get hurt, is inhibiting to a certain degree some of their learning and development, because we're not allowing them to assess their own risk. We're taking care of that for them. And so this is something I think that we want to think about as adults who are the ones who are ultimately designing these particular spaces.
That's similar to the hygiene hypothesis.
Exactly.
Where, they kept them away from all, bugs and soil, and then they get autoimmune diseases. Yeah.
And the fancy word for that is the neurontocracy. So, yeah, look that one up. Okay, so this is just a picture of the actual sample from the study. But the reason why I put it in here is, in addition to thinking about, okay, well, what else on the actual school campus can it afford? This is another option that many schools have, is actual garden on the school. So there are several schools within the district that have gardens. Some of them are tended, some of them are not, which makes a difference. But this is also something else that could be a wonderful learning opportunity for children to be able to have a garden on their school and be able to work with it. Also thinking about this idea of what else is around the neighborhood. So I looked at things like the distance between parks, how far they were from the school, and looking at things like nature play opportunities or community gardens that were around the schools that the children could essentially walk to. And this is an image, the one that's on the left is just a sample. The one that has all the green spaces in it, those are all Chicago Park District parks. And so all but one of the schools within the sample is within a walking distance of a park. So that's another factor that could be involved, right? We can enhance the experiences by thinking about using those alternative spaces as well. This is really looking at all of it at once. And so these are the lowest performing schools, the ones who had the lowest scores as far as their assessment of the play spaces were concerned. These are spread out all over the city. And what I think is interesting is that you have, even though they were not the best, they have things that are on their campus. They also have things that are very close by their campus that could potentially support and afford more to the children's learning and development. And so my idea is like, hey, let's take advantage of this and come up. This is a low cost option, We don't have to buy anything, essentially, which is important. And it is something that is doable. If we came up with a concept of saying like, hey, we're going to have long-standing permission slips, and we will be able to take the children to the park, and that's going to be a regular thing that we do every Friday. Or we're going to have clothing that we have at the school that's prepped for being outside, and we have a set of rain boots and a set of rain jackets, and we just leave that there so that we can throw that on over whatever we're using to go and have some experiences outside in some more inclement weather. Because that's one of the excuses people talk about that. I'm going to skip that one. All right, so this I think is very interesting because this is the Olmsted Society, right? And thank you again, because I was very excited to find this. And I also think that there are parallels in the measure that I'm talking about, which came from a landscape architect, which obviously this man was a landscape architect as well. And you'll see some of those connections, I think, with some of the principles that he highlights as essential for creating these really beautiful, nutritive parks, essentially. And so I think you guys are familiar with these concepts, right? I imagine that some of you have seen them before, right? Yes? Not the first time? Okay. So Ann and I, of course, got to talking as we were preparing this conversation, and we said, well, we were thinking of adding a couple more S's to this. And so one that come up is stewardship. And so when you look at the literature in children who have more opportunities to learn and play outside, one of the outcomes of that is that they start to develop a sense of stewardship, right? They want to care for the environment because they live in that environment and they learn more about the environment, and it instills a sense of wanting to take care of this. It has a value to me. And then another one we come up with was sustainability, because this is really the support of all of the biodiversity that we have on this planet. And obviously, after hearing this talk, I hope you guys are excited to be reminded of how amazing our planet is and how amazing living things are. And just thinking about the importance of sustaining that, right? And for future generations. And so when we're talking about kids, they need to hear about this stuff, right? They need the exposure because they're the future minds. They're the ones who are going to be here when we're all gone. Okay, so these are, don't think outside the box. You guys live in a very, very beautiful place where it's in your backyard. It's in the neighborhood. There are boulevards here. Children can use those spaces. Families can use those spaces, taking advantage of those affordances that are there. Obviously, parks and schoolyards and things like that, you guys are aware of. The forest preserve, you have community gardens here. All of that is at your fingertips, and that really is a huge advantage, and that's also something to take care of and to advocate for. So building on something that Ann had mentioned too with regard to native plants and species, one thing that I think about is children really learning about that and then being involved in the identification of that, like being able to find these things, be walking along the river and say, hey, I know what this is. This is yarrow. And this is a native plant. I've seen this before. My mom has this in her garden. So that type of connection, I think, is feasible, especially in a place like this. And I feel like you guys could be somewhat of a model just because of the amazing, amazing access that you do have. So that's my 2 cents there. Okay, so last but not least, we're thinking just about connecting with nature. It's really not that hard, right? Just like the babies, go into your senses and just feel and experience being outside. It could be tapping into your hearing, tapping into the way that you're feeling something, the way that it physically touches. Starting with the most basic is the best of just interacting and just engaging. Then these interactions we know also are beneficial, even if they're passive. So if I look out the window, like Ann was saying, for 40 seconds, that's going to help me rejuvenate. They've done studies in classrooms where children have a view versus children who don't have a view. They score better on standardized tests because of a view. So that just shows you kind of how potent this is. Obviously, the more interactive and active the interactions are, the more potent they're going to become, right?
And actually, that was one of the first nature studies, was showing that women who had their gallbladders out healed quicker and needed less pain medicine
Yep.
when they had a view of nature as opposed to a view of a brick wall. That was done in the 80s by Robert Ulrich, yeah.
They also did one too with crime, where they had a comparison of crime, and if you had an area with more view, less crime, and in the same building, right? Other side of the building, not so nice of a group, worse crime. So interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just an idea of the frequency of it. We want to take advantage of what is local, what's close by. Yes, maybe we might take that awesome trip to Yellowstone. However, the daily doses are what we're talking about, is really getting yourself in there as much as possible and noticing the things that are around you that you interact with the most. How to reconnect? This really is up to you. So we have some suggestions here, but you know, maybe you're a walking person. Like, I'm not a sit-down meditation person. I have a hard time doing that, but I have to walk around, and it does help me to just be able to go walk. Or looking at these different aspects of the horizon and how the light changes throughout the day. Is it okay?
Yeah, there's just a bar. There's just
Okay, well, we're almost
control.
done. Okay, and then here are some suggestions of open-ended activities that are great for engaging outside. Pick and choose what work for you. Also thinking about the children in your families. You know, maybe you're a really watery person, you know, find some of those seashells, go for a kayak ride or a swim. Maybe you love gardening and you just really get into digging in the dirt and finding some worms and this kind of thing. All of that is great. So just thinking yourself, what are the things that you enjoy, and doing those things outside.
And at the end, we're going to have a QR code, and I have actually created a 4-page handout on, if you like this activity, such as bird watching, what is the pro-earth modification you can do to help the birds while you're enjoying them, such as having a bird seed or bird houses, turning your lights off while they're migrating, which is right now. Simple things like that. So you'll have that with the barcode at the end.
And just another pitch for the children is the children are going to get the most benefits from the natural experiences that they have that are the local ones. So if you show a child a picture of a mountain in a movie, that's great, but that child is going to get a lot more out of that random plant that's growing through the cement that is just fascinating to them of how that is even possible. So letting them get as much experience with the nature that is close by. And that is something we wanted to leave you guys with. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you for coming and listening to us share our ideas. And here is a little QR code for you for the PDF that Ann was talking about. That document is in there, and then I just included a bunch of websites that I think could be helpful as far as resources for families and what to look for as far as options for doing things in nature, getting information about nature, all that sort of good stuff. So please take a picture, and then we also gave it to Dan. So if something happens with the QR code, talk to Dan. He has the document. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
So I have a 15-month-old granddaughter
Okay.
who I wanted to put in the grass and just sit with for a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And then my son noticed a big bee thing, brown bee thing. And so that was short-lived.
Right.
How early can you just plunk them in the grass assuming there's no big bee thing?
Early.
Early?
Right
So,
away, yeah.
Right away they can crawl around in the grass? And,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, even the youngest babies, it's actually healthy for them to get doses outside. I mean, obviously I wouldn't suggest, rolling them around in the flowers and getting a bunch of pollen all over them. But hanging out in the grass.
You have to know your grass. You don't want to have any pesticides on it or, that sort of thing. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, we hold nature-based events, but we usually don't get a lot of people coming out. How do you get children and adults to come out to these types of things?
interesting.
It's a process. I think communication, so how are you networking? How are you spreading the word about these different events? That can be a factor. Is it online? Is it blasted so people can find information on it, like Instagram or any of those social media platforms? This can be helpful because people are so tapped into that stuff lately. Also, relationships, your interactions with the people that you talk with regularly, sharing that information with them. I think the schools or any kind of after-school activities, sports, where children and families are going to be involved is another great area to be talking and promoting these types of events or meetings, what have you. I would say diversifying them. So maybe like us, we're, obviously heady, getting into these like very academic theory conversations this evening. That's not necessarily going to appeal to everybody, right? So maybe we want to think about doing something. Everybody come outside to the park and bring your favorite board game, and we all are going to just play games outside. Or building an installation out of cardboard. I've actually done that before and invited families to just come and just get crazy with all this recycled cardboard, and then they can like break it, cut it, draw over it, whatever, and it becomes this interactive art piece, essentially, but happening outside.
I would say that you need to meet people where they're at. So I live in a northern suburb, and we started a little growing native group, and it started with about 30 members in COVID, and we have over 175 now.
That's awesome.
We do little emails. We go to the farmers market. We have garden tours. We're doing River Day. Probably you're doing it around here because it's Chicago-wide, but we're doing River Day this Saturday and trying to do different activities to attract the different people. And that's helping. We're going to have a kids thing and, have little incentives there, little gifts or, treats to hand out to get the children there. But I know what you're saying. We sometimes feel like the same group is volunteering a lot, and you want to bring in the youth. And, the younger are so overwhelmed with their, work and raising children and all the activities they're supposed to. It's trying to get them to realize, right, that the free time in nature is probably more important. But I would just keep trying. You will keep getting them. And we do emails, and we don't realize how we're touching people until later they tell us. So you just have to keep trying, and you'll reach them in different ways. That's why I did the handout with a multitude of activities, so that if people are like, how do I go out? It has listed just about every activity I could think of, and then obviously the pro-earth section of it.
Like for adults, if you have a meeting, I think if you offer free food, you tend to get more adults.
Absolutely.
What kinds of things can you do with kids? I guess.
Food always works.
Okay.
Food always works.
They did a moth ball, so that, at night, on a summer night, trying to see the moths. And then they had treats, and they did a scavenger hunt with stuffed animals and toys and things. I happen to have a lot of Feastables, which is a chocolate that young children are loving right now. So that's going to be our River Day enticement of the young. You guys heard of Feastables? They're not listening over there. Oh, smile there, yeah. Yeah, so little things like that, just to get them out and hook them. But it is harder with all the activities they're doing.
I think part of it is, though, how is it going to be intergenerational? because you really want everybody to feel that they can be part of whatever this is. Right? Come into the park. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. This is something that could be valuable for everybody. And so the more opportunities that you can create, activities or situations or events, what have you, that are covering all the ages, I think the more people come. And with children, you know, obviously you have to think about the parents because they're the ones that are going to take them there, likely. So how are you going to get the parents to think, oh, this is a worthwhile idea to come let my kid just play with a bunch of random cardboard on Saturday? You know, why does that sound good? And so maybe giving the parents some information of, you know, obviously a much more digestible version of why it is beneficial to do this unstructured outdoor play and how that is helpful for their children and then also for them as a family.
And also the schools buy in.
Schools.
We've preschools and we've gone to the elementary schools. I've helped with programs. They have after school or even coming at recess and hanging out in nature with them. They're very amenable to it because they do, well, I should say, the ones I've talked to really do believe in nature, but I would assume in a community like this, the schools would also promote it. So you may be able to work with them. I'm doing something with the Lake Forest open lands, teaching kids about some of the nature things. And the kids love it when they're out there.
They do.
It's amazing. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Oh, I was just going to ask, when you were mentioning trying to incorporate public spaces, public green spaces for schools, but the kids, as I'm recalling it, like only had 20 minutes for outdoor recess. How did you get them there? You know,
This is part, I'm so glad that you asked this, right? Especially if you're talking about younger children, because if you're 5-year-olds, it's going to take them 10 minutes to get the coats on to go outside and line up to get out there. So the 20-minute recess time is not enough, frankly. And if you wanted to do something like that, if you wanted to take them off campus, you would need extended period of time. One thing that I talk to my students about, and I practice myself as an educator, is what I call this like advocating with finesse, which is essentially how can I work the system to benefit what I really know is best. So could something be designed that relates to the academic content that they're working on? Are they doing some kind of work right now related to geometry and shapes? So now we're going to go into the park that's close by, and we're going to assess all the different 3D shapes that we find there. And then we're also going to loop in some free play time because, of course, we need to because we're at the park. But you can justify it by connecting it to the curriculum, to the expectations of the school, because they are very rigid in certain places. I imagine here is not an exception for wanting them to perform, right? Academic performance gets a lot of weight. And so if you can align it essentially to whatever they're working on, that helps. Also, teacher training, right? Teachers need support. Some teachers are very scared to take all 30 kids outside, right? Next to the river and worrying about what's gonna happen there. And so those types of conversations and preparations I think are important too, and involving other people. So we need some more support this day. So can we get some, you know, family volunteers or even, you know, neighborhood volunteers, people who maybe are retired but want to come and work with the children for that day? That's great, and they can come and help you with something like that. And so just thinking a little bit outside of the box, but then recognizing that the box has a strong hold. So how can you align with it, but then still get out of it? If that makes sense.
So for the river celebration this weekend, is there a website?
Chicago Rivers. I think it's Chicago
We can look it up.
Rivers.
I think you're right.
Yeah, Chicago River Day is I think what they're called. And there's about 12 different main sites, probably more than that. So our local open lands.
It's with Open Lands, right?
Well, yeah, you can try it. I can find it on my, go down though,
This
that's
is
fine.
boat tours.
I
Here
will
it is.
Oh, you found it? Good.
Yep,
Yeah, Friends of the Chicago River. So that
That's
may
it.
be part of it. The Skokie River by us feeds into the Chicago River.
Yeah, it does.
Whereas you have the Des Plaines and the Salt Creek, and so
Well,
they
maybe
may
you
not.
got to make your own river today then. That's it.
Yeah,
But this could be helpful for getting ideas, for sure.
yeah. Well,
And Chicago is not that far.
and the Cook County Forest Preserve really does do a lot. I know. I've done some work with them. Yeah, a lot of programming and very open to, I'm sure, collaborating. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you so
and
much.
listening to us.
Despite our AV, thank you for saving
Yes.
us with the AV
Way to
stuff.
save the day.
Yeah. Yes, and thank you.
Oh,
So I just want to give a few thanks.
Oh, sure.
Thanks to Dr. Kate Varey for her presentation and Dr. Ann Vertovec for hers. Am I close enough to the mic? Come closer. All right. Just a few other announcements. Next Saturday, May 17th, and well, that's a week from this Saturday, there'll be a landscape workday along Long Common. Our first walking tour of the year is on Sunday, May 25th at 2 o'clock at the train station. We'll be going north of the tracks for that walking tour. Our next presentation is Saturday, June 14th, and that is with David Odd. It will be on a Saturday, unlike our usual presentations. Saturday at 1:30 here at the library, free presentation, followed by a 2:30 walking tour of the neighborhood where David will point out edible plants that you can find in your own yard, and followed by, at 5:30, a dinner at Choo Choo, at the Choo Choo restaurant. The walking tour and the dinner are paid events. Tickets can be purchased through his website. If you go to the Olmsted Society website, you'll find a link to David's site where you can purchase tickets for the walking tour and the dinner. Thanks to Brent, there he is at the back of the room, for his technical support. We did it. We appreciate all your help. Thanks to the library staff. Thanks to Riverside TV for coming out to record us. And thank you for coming tonight. Good night.